The name Famous Amos still sits on grocery shelves across America, a brand built on joy, generosity, and the promise of something homemade. But behind that name lies a story of ownership, and what happens when a man's identity becomes corporate property. In 1975, Wally Amos opened a single cookie shop on Sunset Boulevard, with a borrowed $25,000 and a recipe from his Aunt Della. Within 5 years, he was shipping cookies nationwide and earning millions in revenue. But a decade later, the man whose name built the empire would be locked out of it, unable to sell cookies under his own name ever again. This isn't a story about cookies. It's a story about control, about the thin line between fame and ownership, between the dream and the deal. It's the rise and unraveling of the man they called Famous Amos. This is Black Business Files. Wally Amos was born in Tallahassee, Florida in 1936. He was raised in Harlem by his Aunt Della, who taught him how to bake chocolate chip and pecan cookies with patience and precision. After serving in the U.S. Air Force, he returned to New York and took a mailroom job at the William Morris Agency. In time, Wally Amos became the agency's first black talent agent. He represented Simon and Garfunkel, Marvin Gaye, and the Supremes. He had a gift for discovering talent, and an even greater gift for selling warmth and personality. But by the early 1970s, the music business had drained him. He began baking again, delivering cookies to clients and friends as small gestures of appreciation. People loved them. He realized those cookies could become more than a gift. They could become a business. In 1975, with about $25,000 from Marvin Gaye, Helen Reddy, and a few close friends, Wally Amos opened the first Famous Amos cookie store at 7181 Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles. The block wasn't glamorous. It was known for high vacancy and crime. Advisors told him he was taking a risk. He saw what they didn't: foot traffic, curiosity, and a chance to make something personal feel premium. The shop was small, one oven, one counter, and the smell of chocolate chip cookies drifting into the street. Within months, the line wrapped around the block. That first year brought in roughly $300,000 in sales, strong for a single boutique bakery. Soon, 2 more shops followed, another in Los Angeles and one in Honolulu. But the real growth came from distribution. Famous Amos cookies reached Bloomingdale's, department stores, and airlines. By 1979, the brand was shipping nationwide, with annual revenue near $12 million. Famous Amos wasn't just a bakery anymore. It was a national enterprise built on one man's personality. The smile on the bag was real, but the structure behind it was fragile. The problem with sudden success is scale. By 1980, demand outpaced capacity. To expand, Amos sought outside investors. He sold a 51% interest to the Bass Brothers Enterprises of Texas for about $1.1 million. The deal gave him capital and cost him control. By the mid-1980s, additional financing rounds diluted his ownership further. In one key agreement, he transferred trademark and likeness rights for Famous Amos to the corporate entity. From that moment forward, the company, not the man, owned the name, the image, and the story. He didn't just sell stock, he sold himself. By 1985, the company brought in around $10 million in sales but lost roughly $300,000. The investors wanted operational efficiency. Wally wanted authenticity. He was outnumbered, and the company that bore his name was no longer his. Once the Shansby Group acquired controlling interest in 1988, they replaced much of the founding team. Wally remained the face, but not the voice. Former employees recalled that he'd walk into meetings surrounded by posters of himself and be treated like a guest. Management altered the product to make it more shelf-stable and cheaper to produce. Consumers noticed the difference and sales began to flatten. The brand that once symbolized handmade quality became a mass-market commodity. By the end of the decade, Wally Amos sold his remaining shares, reportedly for less than $3 million. He had built a national company and walked away with a fraction of its value. It was the end of one chapter, and the start of something more painful. After losing control, Wally Amos tried to rebuild. He launched a new venture called Wally Amos Presents. But the corporate owners of Famous Amos sued him, arguing that Wally Amos had become commercially synonymous with their trademark. In court, his own earlier contracts proved them right. He lost. The judge barred him from using his own name in connection with cookies. He responded with dark humor. "They took my name," he said, "so I became a man with no name." His next business was literally called Uncle No Name's Cookies. It wasn't just branding, it was protest. He had lost his company, his fortune, and now even his identity in commerce. He didn't lose it overnight. He lost it clause by clause. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe to Black Business Files. We examine the rise, the risk, and the real cost of Black entrepreneurship in America. Ownership matters, and so does understanding how easily it can be lost. To the public, Wally Amos looked successful. He was famous, visible, and beloved. But privately, he was struggling. By the early 1990s, he filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, listing more than $750,000 in debt. He owned no part of the company that still bore his smile. The ownership chain that followed reads like a corporate relay. Bass Brothers in 1985, Shansby Group in 1988, President Baking in 1992 for $61 million, Keebler in 1998, Kellogg in 2001, and finally Ferrero Group in 2019, acquiring the cookie portfolio, including Famous Amos, for $1.3 billion. A billion-dollar brand built from a $25,000 idea, and the founder held none of it. There was also a deeper pattern. A Black entrepreneur whose image humanized a corporate product, even after he'd been pushed out of ownership. He never made the conversation about race, but the optics were impossible to ignore. The smiling founder on the box no longer had a voice in the business. It had happened in other industries. Now it was happening with cookies. Years after bankruptcy, as Famous Amos moved through corporate hands, the Keebler Company reached out again. In 1999, they brought him back, not as an owner, but as a symbol. He agreed to serve as a paid spokesperson on one condition: that the recipe return closer to his original. For a brief moment, it felt like redemption. The founder finally recognized by the company that had taken his name. But the arrangement was short-lived. Once again, his presence sold cookies for others, not ownership for himself. He left quietly, understanding that visibility without equity was just performance. He had become the brand's mascot, a friendly face on history's balance sheet, but never again its decision-maker. After the lawsuits and bankruptcy, Wally Amos shifted from selling products to spreading lessons. He co-founded the Read It Loud Foundation, dedicated to children's literacy. He told audiences that reading saved lives, and could save businesses too. "If I had read more," he said, "I might have owned more." He became a motivational speaker and author of several books, including The Cookie Never Crumbles. He couldn't put his name on a bag of cookies, but he could attach it to an idea. Ownership requires literacy, legal and financial literacy as much as academic. He turned his defeat into education. Later, Wally Amos moved to Hawaii, where he launched a small cookie company called the Cookie Kahuna. No investors, no lawyers, just cookies and conversation. He sold them directly, on beaches and at local markets, living simply and happily. In 2016, he appeared on Shark Tank seeking $50,000 for 20% of the business. The sharks praised his story but declined to invest, calling the margins too thin. It was a quiet, symbolic full circle. The man once courted by investors now stood before them asking only for belief. He smiled when they passed. "You don't need to win every battle to prove you're still fighting," he said. He kept baking, he kept teaching. This time he owned his piece, if not the name. Today, Famous Amos is owned by Ferrero Group, the multinational behind Nutella and Keebler. The cookies still carry his name. The man who created them receives nothing. Famous Amos now markets itself as Wonders from the World, celebrating global ingredients. It's a billion-dollar product. But it was built on a single recipe from Harlem, and on the vision of a man who underestimated the value of paperwork. Creativity built the brand. Contracts took it away. Wally Amos's journey from $25,000 to a global enterprise, from 51% ownership to zero, is a study in how capitalism rewards documentation more than inspiration. They trademarked his smile. They licensed his name. They sold his story back to the public. And the man who baked the first batch was erased from the balance sheet. Today, business schools cite his case when teaching about founder identity, intellectual property, and the limits of personal branding. His legacy is both sweet and bitter, proof that vision without protection becomes vulnerability. Wally Amos died on August 13, 2024 in Honolulu at the age of 88. He spent his final years reading to children, writing letters to entrepreneurs, and baking for neighbors. They took his company, they took his fortune, they took his name, but they never took his purpose. He proved that ownership is more than paperwork, it's self-definition. When a man's name becomes someone else's property, the question isn't just what he lost, but what the system gained. Wally Amos built one of America's first gourmet cookie empires. He became a household name, and then he became a warning. He didn't lose to failure, he lost to ownership. This has been Black Business Files, the stories of those who built from nothing, and the systems that turned their dreams into someone else's assets. Ownership is not about fame, it's about control. Do you think a brand can survive when its founder no longer owns its name? Subscribe for more histories that reveal how Black enterprise built America, and what it cost to do it. Thank you for watching.